I want to show you something really weird. Harvard professor Adrian Vermeule thinks the executive branch is one person who can see everything. Vermeule criticizes the idea that the executive branch won't confine its discretion to the law unless it can be dragged into court by someone who sees wrongdoing.
The trope is that the rule of law is somehow threatened if courts cannot take jurisdiction to inquire into and provide a remedy for every instance of allegedly illegal behavior by the executive. A corollary is the belief that the rule of law will pop like a soap bubble unless the executive instantly and on pain of contempt obeys every judicial order.
Notice how Vermeule sees multiple courts, but imagines the executive and voters as a single unitary object. Replace courts with president, executive with employee, and judicial with presidential. Vermeule's passage would now say,
The trope is that the rule of law is somehow threatened if the president cannot take jurisdiction to inquire into and provide a remedy for every instance of allegedly illegal behavior by the employee. A corollary is the belief that the rule of law will pop like a soap bubble unless the employee instantly, and on pain of contempt, obeys every presidential order.
Vermeule imagines courts have imperfect information, but voters and executive branch managers have perfect information. Vermeule thinks courts are checking the president from a separate department, as if the president is otherwise a single mind and vantage point with his employee.
If judges are allowed to assume that the presidency is indeed occupied by a man they deem to be bad,
Vermeule also imagines that 51% of voters, in a single election, can discover information about and convey supervision to a single government employee, as well as a court proceeding can.
Courts using adjudicative procedures are hardly the only institutions that can check illegality or abuse of powers by public officials.
Vermeule goes on to describe some situations where a court does poorly looking over the shoulder of a government employee, attempting to regulate the employee's behavior from a second vantage point.
The error of attempting to accomplish through adjudicative forms what are essentially tasks of economic allocation, the necessity of allocating scarce resources in ways that cannot be reduced to questions of right, sense of trusteeship that goes with being given a job to do that makes sense and being allowed to do it the sensible way.
Vermeule's model of conveying preferences to decision-makers is crude, so I will provide my own. Then we can proceed to see whether the multiple vantage points of the executive branch and voters are really superior to the multiple vantage points of a court imposing law on a government employee. A distributed decision-maker consists of 1. Knowledge of a domain, e.g. farming. 2. Information the knowledge is applied to, e.g. the precipitation in a certain tract of land. 3. Incentives and constraints that convey public costs and benefits to decision-makers, such as the price system or established preferences recorded in laws. And 4. Other independent decision-makers who monitor whether each other are breaking the rules, with local processes to create penalties for breaking the rules. What Vermeule is calling situation-specific economic decisions is number 2, information the knowledge is applied to. And what Vermeule is calling trusteeship is the incentive to create an outcome that benefits others. Vermeule imagines this comes internally from the beliefs and agenda of the decision-maker. But we see from centrally planned dictatorships that decision-makers in industry need to be given incentives by the price system, and police need to be given incentives by law. So let's use my model to compare supervision of a government employee by being dragged into court versus being dragged into the office of his immediate supervisor in the executive branch. Let's imagine something like Vermeule envisioned, where the job of the government employee is to allocate radio frequencies so that cities with smaller and larger populations are best served. The external preference is that we don't want all the radio frequencies given to a single radio station in a small town, and the internal preference is that the government employee can secretly sell the radio frequencies for money. The 4 elements in my model are 1. Knowledge of the radio business. 2. Information on the population of different cities. 3. A law which says he has to allocate frequencies fairly. 4. Either voters or courts who can penalize him for allocating frequencies suboptimally. First of all, certainly not the President of the United States, but not even the employee's immediate supervisor, can know the population details that go into the employee's decision, as well as the employee can know them. An immediate supervisor will fare no better trying to learn all the details that each of his employees knows than a court which tries to learn the reason behind every decision. Now suppose a local radio station notices he is getting no frequencies, while another radio station seems to be getting more frequencies than he needs. He can call the government employee and say, "Give me some." Or if that fails, he can try to reach the government employee's supervisor. The employee may simply lie to his supervisor that the complaining station has no listeners. Or, if the supervisor and employee are from the same party in patronage jobs, the employee may point out to his supervisor that the radio station serves their political opposition. The radio station owner is then left using political speech in the town square to explain to his fellow voters how they are being cheated and implore them that they should vote in the next election based on the single issue of radio frequency allocation. Meanwhile, the other side is also in the town square, telling the voters that the radio station owner is a crazy agitator who is lying to them. Very few voters will have the time to become experts on radio frequency allocation. Or the short-changed radio station can sue in court that the government employee has gone outside the bounds of his discretion. The court can compel the government employee to show his data and see whether he has violated his mandate to allocate frequencies based on some preference conveyed in law. Neither the president nor the employee's immediate supervisor can ever hope to learn all the details of the radio business, and nor would they be bothered to when voters will not decide based on it. A local observer bringing the government employee to court, only in the case when he observes from his local vantage point that the employee has exceeded the boundaries of his discretion, is the only practical way to monitor whether the government employee has served his mandate. Laws in court and votes in elections are both means of conveying the preferences of strangers to a government employee decision-maker. And both are means of monitoring the government employee to see whether his discretion has gone outside the set of rules conveyed as laws or whether the outcomes of his decisions have served preferences. Vermeule understands that courts, at a second vantage point, have information problems telling the government employee what to do and monitoring whether he made the best decision given the information only he knew about. Vermeule also understands that voters could never supervise McDonald's managers, who have to be supervised directly by affected parties conveying information through prices and by civil and criminal prosecution. But as a basic human tendency toward collective thought, Vermeule imagines when voters are supervising a government employee they never met in an election once every 4 years to use information only he knows about for their benefit, these information problems magically disappear.